and ask you
I
to,
could ramble to you.
if you don't mind, let me just ask enough to be sure we get some facts in, Jim, okay?
Okay.
We're in Bell Logan's house on West 9th Avenue in Lakewood, Colorado. And with me is Jim Allender, and you now live in Denver.
That is right.
And this is October, I don't know the date anymore.
18th.
18? October 19th. You're in business now, in semi-retirement, or how would you describe yourself now, Jim?
I'm a consultant to a manufacturing firm.
Okay. And you spent a large portion of your life in connections with the mining industry, and that's what we're going to be talking about.
I was raised in the mining camps.
Okay. Jim, would you tell me something about your early childhood, where and when you were born, and about your father and so forth?
My parents were Scotch immigrants. Came to this country in June 1906. I was born October 1907 near Walsenburg. I went to school in the coal camps near Walsenburg, and the 13th strike in that area.
Your father, I think you told me earlier, was nicknamed Sandy. And what were his initials, or how was he identified?
It was Sandy or Alec.
Alec.
Yeah.
And he came out of what kind of mining in Scotland? What had he done?
Coal and shale. Mm-hmm. He was son of a shale miner.
And he was the son of a shale miner, and was this an area of Scotland where mining had gone on for a good while?
Oh, yeah, for years.
Mm-hmm. Do you know what area?
Near Edinburgh.
Mm-hmm. Would you tell me about his experience, which mines he first opened when he got to this country, say when he was in Colorado, 1907 on?
He worked for CF&I. He worked at Pictou. He helped open the Cameron, the Ravenwood. As my mother told me, we lived out there in the tent and slept with the coyotes that would crawl under the tent at night.
That was because these were camps in being open, that were just on
out on the
wilderness.
Prairie. Yeah, out on the prairie. Oh, and
they were generally in the Walsenburg area, or was Pictou further over?
Pictou was in the Walsenburg area.
All of this was in the Walsenburg area.
Yes.
Then. He never went to the far reaches of the CF&I mines that were way over the mountain, the Rockies, or some of those.
He worked in that area as long as they let him work for the CF&I.
You said you remembered things like what it was like. You remember the company stores. Or say, what are your first recollections, aside from what your parents told you?
Well, life at a coal camp, most of them was a relatively closed compound. The camps we lived in were somewhat free compared to a CF&I, what we called a bullpen. Mm-hmm. Barbed wire, mine guards, and what went with it.
All right, the nickname for a really tight CF&I camp that was keeping the Union out was a bullpen?
Bullpen,
Okay.
yeah.
What would you regard as bullpens? Which mines would you describe?
Well, I described Walson
All right.
Robinson
All right.
was fenced in with barbed wire. The company store was at the top of 7th Street in Walsenburg. They didn't have machine guns in those days. They had Gatling guns. They had a Gatling gun on the porch of the company store, pointed down, said,
Was this because the big strike was on, or would it exist?
The strike was on, and
It's the big 1913 strike.
this
that you
went
recall.
into effect even before the strike, in preparation for the strike. And they had searchlights on the top of the store, on the top of a water tank on a hill. I remember we were kids, we'd play in the shadows of that searchlight. Or if we moved, they had the searchlight on us. And of course, later on, searchlight got to be such a provocation. And during the period of Ludlow, that's the actual battle at Ludlow, it was a common thing, those searchlights were shot out. You know, we had a lot of Greek, Balkan miners, and they were crack shots. Give them a 30-30 and they knew what to do with it.
Recently, because except for Colorado and Utah, the Greek miners are not regarded as a ethnic group that are thought of, you know, in coal mines in Appalachia as a major nationality. There have been some things come out about the Greek community and its principal role in these things. Were you able to remember any of the?
There were a number of outstanding Greeks. Tychus in the Ludlow strike.
Yes, Louis Tychus.
Tychus, Tom Mell.
What's that name now?
Mell. It
How
was a taken name.
Yeah.
I could think of a number of them.
That were outstanding people and leadership figures.
And they had just come to this country out of the Balkan War as an oppressed people, come into coal camps and run into Jeff Farr, things of that kind.
Jeff Farr was the sheriff of
Warfano County. He
Right.
was king of Warfano County.
King of Warfano County. And he later appears in key court cases and as a figure with another name in Upton Sinclair's novel,
Well,
King Cole, I guess.
the major opponent who had the backing of the miners was Neely.
Who was Neely?
He was a local resident, Walsenburg. I went to school with his kids, and he had daily threats of assassination, everything.
How did he make his living? Do you remember?
I don't. I think he was a rancher. He had an equity in a hardware store, and he had. There were people in Warfano County who didn't agree with everything Jeff Farr did, and they contributed to backing Neely.
You described free communities, like Pictou was relatively free as a camp, your parents told you, or not?
Pictou, Taldick, Maitland were miners. They were independent, you see. To that extent, they were relatively free. But the rule of Jeff Farr
Controlled it all.
predominated up and down the...
So there was not as many free, in quotes, communities as they were in other counties in Warfano County.
Well, I wouldn't say that because the people around Aguilar, people who lived up Berwyn Canyon, Forbes, and that area, they lived in bullpens. That's the only way you can describe it.
And let's go back over that. That meant they were behind barbed wire.
They were behind barbed wire. They were in debt to the company store. They had to rent a company house.
They couldn't leave the camp or come back in except on pass almost of
it wasn't a pass, but the mine guard knew who was going and coming. And if they didn't like your going and coming, you just didn't stay there. You know.
Right.
They'd pick you by force. Yeah.
Now, that system, do you know whether from your parents did that come into existence after, say, 1907 as the fear of the union organizing drive grew?
No, I think it was predominant. It was a company policy. It was instituted to bring people in, get them into a company house, get them in debt to a company store.
I'm thinking more of the barbed wire usually follows some union organizing.
Yeah, well, the barbed wire went up when the union organizers were active.
Yeah, because that's a gross thing.
Yeah. And the first blacks, I remember when they brought them.
When was that? Do you have a recollection?
Prior with the 1913 strike. This would be about
just before the strike.
11 or 12. They set up what they called Red Camp. It was
where was Red Camp located?
Red Camp was an isolated section of the Walson Camp, and that was.
Which way did the Walson Camp lie from Walsenburg? Was it west or
top 7th Street?
All right. So Walson, as a mine, was actually as close in to the town of Walsenburg as any of the CF&I properties.
Right on the border.
Robinson was further out, or?
Robinson was just west of the Walson.
And then Maitland, where did it lie?
It was over the Hogback.
What was the Hogback?
Hogback is famous in that history. The Union men took up their positions on top of Hogback. That's where they shot out the searchlights from.
Okay, but so in the 1913-1914 year-long battles, this Hogback became almost a battle position.
Well, it was famous during that 3-day siege there of Ludlow. The miners were holding that. We had a dentist there in Walsenburg. I can't remember.
A dentist in Walsenburg during the battles. Huh?
He was, I don't know, held some position in the National Guard. And he got on his horse and took up 4 or 5 of his cavalrymen. He was going up on the Hogback and kill enough miners and pull their teeth to make him a watch fob. I seen him come back, his foot in the stirrup, and the horse dragging him down the street. He never got on the Hogback.
Hogback was held by the armed miners at that point.
Yeah, it's a ridge. Just you go.
So you're describing then Maitland as lying over the Hogback as a ridge. Okay.
Yeah.
What other mines would you name as CF&I mines then close enough in? Forbes, was it a
that was
a location or was it a mine?
Trinidad, Ludlow area. We never lived there. We lived a couple of years in Aguilar after the strike. And all these mines are up canyons.
Very isolated one from the other and easy for the company to keep control. Do you remember any particular instances of brutality prior to the actual strike that you witnessed? You were speaking earlier as a child of seeing mine guards handling an active union member?
Well, I think I told you or related to you. My first experience or witness at the Walson mine, this is just prior to 13th strike. The mine guards gathered at the mouth of the mine, 30-30s and pick handles. And what was the story was there was a union organizer down the mine. And they went down about half hour later. They brought him out, clubbed him. And
you witnessed this?
We were
this
just
you saw,
kids.
Yeah. You were 6 years old, you see.
6 or 7.
6 or 7.
Yeah. And they, the final story, as I heard it, he was put in a flat car, a box car, and they had a favorite expression, sent him down to Cucharas. It was way out on the prairie.
Cucharas.
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 Yeah, spoon in Spanish. Cuchara. Between Walsenburg and the Kansas line, and dumped him out. See? And I think.
And you would gather this was pretty standard treatment for any miner they thought was organized inside their property.
For union organizers, that was.
It was said that John Lawson, some 4 or 5 years earlier, had actually gone in there, like 1906 or 7.
Well, John Lawson was. Well, I'd say up till the time of 27 strike, my mother had a high regard for John Lawson. He had guts.
Let's take your dad. What was his role? Was he, because of his key capability, actually outside of what would have been considered union jurisdiction on some of the jobs he did, part of the time, or?
No. You might say when he was a pumper up at the Niggerhead, that was another property above the CF&I. That was a new development.
Niggerhead belonged to another company?
Another company.
But it boarded CF&I.
Yeah.
Right.
He had to get to and from work, he had to go through CF&I property. That's only incidental to the problems he had with CF&I and the blacklist.
Actually, would you tell me what you recall as how his problems developed? Was he involved in the battles, or was he more sympathetic to the miners as he saw them in the
Well, my Uncle Dick was an active striker.
Tell us about your Uncle Dick, who he was. Had he come any earlier to this country?
He came to this country with my father.
And did he go into work in coal mines?
He worked in the mines. He worked for CF&I.
Yeah.
In fact, he worked at Robinson when the strike was called.
Now, he became an active UMW organizer as well?
If you went on strike, you were active.
Right. Right.
I remember that distinctly. He had to.
And he was an active UMW
Yes. And he was not only persecuted, blacklisted.
Well, let's follow his life. What was his life like in the years that followed?
Well, I can describe better his family.
All right.
They suffered a great deal.
He had a wife he brought from Scotland?
Yes.
And how many children?
3 children, 4 children.
And you remember them suffering much worse than you in this period? Or?
Yes, because food, rent, and all of those things were hard to come by. He finally had to leave Walsenburg. He went up to...
How would he even live? He had to get out of company houses, which meant he had to get into town, huh?
Well, he was more fortunate. He lived in town. The people who had to live in tents were those in company houses.
Yes, who were evicted.
Yeah. And, Dick worked for Southern power. He worked for the telephone company, lineman, stuff like that. Never regular, enough to keep the wolf in the door. But to get work and reestablish himself, he had to leave Walsenburg. And he went then into the quartz mines up here at Georgetown.
Mm-hmm. And he worked for many years then in metal mining or mineral?
Up until 21, 22.
You ever go to work in copper? Or?
No, Georgetown area is silver, lead, zinc. Mm-hmm. It's complex.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he worked in metal mines then?
Oh, yes.
The rest of his, until
he come back to the coal area in 2022.
So the suffering, though, you remember very clearly because of the blacklisting and what his family, the children, were some of them your age? Or?
I have a cousin about 8 months older than I, about the same age, yeah. But I remember how my aunt used to wash clothes on the scrub board, stuff like that.
How about your own family? How large was it, Jim?
Well, that's the story.
Okay.
There were 12 of us.
Where were you in that ranking?
The oldest.
You were the oldest?
Yeah.
Okay.
And it starts from the Walsenburg area till we left southern Colorado.
And went to?
The last job I tell you about that my father had it in the Walsenburg area was at the Mutual. And this was World War.
Did it belong to CF&I or not?
No, but it was closely controlled.
Yes.
There were no question about shortage for coal or that, but I remember this mine. It was terribly gaseous, methane, and my father was fire boss at this mine, and he had inspected this place, and as I recall, there were about 3,000 cubic feet of air going through this main.
It's very difficult to ventilate in view of the gaseous.
That volume of air going through, the air should have been good.
Yeah.
But it was loaded, was full of gas.
Right.
So my father come out, and instead of letting the men go down, he said, "There's nobody going down." The mine superintendent says, "They're going down. We need that coal."
What year was this now?
This was about 1917.
Yeah.
When the war was on.
Yeah.
And the old man says, "There's nobody going down till I say the gas is out of there." Well, by law, he was right.
That's right.
But by company law, he was wrong. Well, he lasted a short while after that, and he was fired. And of course,
now these were non-union conditions all through there, following the smashing of that strike.
There was a smattering of locals here and there, but
UMW basically was driven either underground or out of existence.
Mostly underground, and a lot of the guys were like my Uncle Dick, who had suffered. There was rebellion in their family. You know, they had to get out.
They had to leave. They couldn't remain.
Get out and feed.
To remain underground was extremely difficult. Some single men could do it, or some were willing to engage in bloody sacrifice.
I'll tell you about a little incident. I don't know what was prior to Ludlow or following Ludlow. They had a women's protest meeting in Trinidad to free Mother Jones
Oh, she'd been arrested in Trinidad.
Yeah,
being
sure.
held in Trinidad, I remember, yeah.
So my mother was a principal in that.
Was she? She helped organize that?
And they went, the Walsenburg delegation went to Trinidad. They marched in the parade. General Chase rode the cavalry into the parade. And I remember one incident sticks in my mind. One of the cavalrymen slashed the breast off the wife of an Italian miner.
Some of these things are described as legends that were created later, but you lived through this period.
Well, I remember that.
Your mother would come back and be able to immediately
And
describe to you
told
what
the-
she saw, not
told
what
the
was a
story.
legend. Is that right?
Yeah.
What was your mother's given name? What would she have been known?
Jean
Jean.
Cairns was her maiden name. Yeah.
And she was a principal in what, in your impression, was quite a large woman's.
Well, she was one of the committee put together the Walsenburg.
Demonstration.
Well,
was it
they
called?
organized a group and they went by train
Train.
to Trinidad.
That was really the main means of transportation then, was the
yeah,
train.
because you didn't have cars in those days like you have today.
What about the fact that essentially this entire operation, especially south of Walsenburg, was in Spanish-speaking, native Spanish-speaking country? How did that influence the impressions you had as a child, any of the movement, and so forth?
In
what
those
ways?
days, it didn't because there weren't too many Spanish-speaking worked in the mines unless you got down to Delawa.
And El Primero, Segundo,
in that-
in that area, you
that-
had Mexican Americans or outside of Trinidad.
And in my experience that time, we didn't have too much.
Even on mines, say with a Spanish name like Aguilar, was essentially not, it had no connection like Primero or
Aguilar,
Segundo.
Empire, and that area was predominantly European.
Southern and Eastern
Yeah.
European, essentially Italian, Greek, Montenegrin. You had the whole works in there, huh?
Well,
Turk, did you ever?
Well, Turks, I'll admit that I had a very touching experience
Yes.
with Turks who tried to come into the area. The Greeks didn't like them, and
They had freed themselves in Europe, or were trying to, from Turkish rule, I guess, at that
well,
time.
I don't know. They wound up in Tioga. We lived in Tioga.
You were in Tioga when you were how old then?
Oh, this was World War I,
All right.
and Turks were green miners, and then went to work. And I think the second day they got caught in a cave-in. One of them was killed, and the other broke his leg. And those prior to that, the man got killed. They brought him out at 4 o'clock. And I remember we were kids. They'd throw him in a crosscut. And
You can remember, let me see if I understand it right, repeat this again, what your recollection is of the custom?
well, if a man were killed during a working period,
Yes.
they didn't stop hauling coal out. They brought the dead body out after the coal trips.
All the coal was hauled out first, okay.
and they'd bring them out.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, this Turk I'm telling you about, he couldn't read or write English, couldn't communicate with his family, and I think I was about a 6th grader at that time, and I remember going over and listening to his problem, his difficulty, and I wrote the letter to send back to the old country.
Yes.
To tell his wife that his buddy had been killed and he had a broken leg. In fact, my Greek friends didn't like that at all.
Yeah. To them, they didn't like the Turks, who were
Well,
not a
yeah.
large group anyway in the mountains.
No, in fact, that's the only.
The only group you knew of Turks.
Yeah.
What about that? Now, you wrote the letter for him, and here's a guy with a broken leg. What impressions, if any, of the doctoring that the people got did you have?
Well, that was touch and go. Sometimes, if you had a conscientious doctor, it was the best they could give under the circumstances. A company doctor out in the outlying camps was so hard pressed. He was usually an alcoholic, but he managed to mend broken legs, deliver babies.
What are your impressions? In what camps, for instance, can you now even recall any doctor yourself, either by name or by impression?
Yeah, by marks.
Huh?
By marks.
Okay.
I had a dog bit me here.
You're showing me your right leg,
Right
down
leg.
on the lower calf.
And the treatment I got there, I got gangrene.
Where were you at the time?
Tioga.
In Tioga, okay. This
Gangrene.
would have been World War I then
Yeah.
in Tioga, okay.
I'm telling how old I am now.
Okay.
Gangrene set in, and I remember my mother had to take me to Walsenburg to stay with friends.
You were doctored first by the company doctor, though? But gangrene set in and he
and-
couldn't cope with anything then.
Well, you just throw on a new piece of gauze and wipe off the fluid. That was it. She took me to town, and
How did you get from Tioga to Walsenburg by this period?
well, there was stagecoach,
Okay.
and we went by stagecoach. Doc Matthews took care of me.
In Walsenburg, okay.
And he was an old standby.
But he was an independent fee doctor.
He lived in
Walsenburg.
Walsenburg.
Okay. But from the reputation, the word you heard, the care would vary depending on the dedication or the lack of competence or whatever of the particular.
It was solely up to the individual.
Right. There were no minimum standards as far as you
No,
saw it enforced.
I don't know if you're familiar with, they had a pill those days, Caramel or Camel.
Caramel.
Caramel.
Caramel, I think is what it was called.
It was like, Caramel was administered for
Yeah.
everything.
Yeah, it was pretty standard.
Huh? Well, I
Yeah, I think I've heard of it, yeah.
Yeah. And,
What do you remember about, he dispensed it to you for that or for other
no,
people?
well, he tells you go to doctor's office. I remember we cleaned out one, that was standard.
All right, you cleaned out a doctor's office?
Yeah,
When?
when the
Where?
doctor moved.
Yeah. At Tioga or some other place?
Tioga.
All right, say one doctor left and another was coming, you mean?
Well, the next, we had to take on the doctor at
A
the
visiting doctor from the next camp.
next camp.
Then you mean in just cleaning up?
Well, he had his office in a company house, had one room set aside for medical supplies.
I see. In a larger than normal, more like a boss's house. Is
No,
what they would get on a.
this was a company shack.
The doctor at Tioga only got a company shack, right? Not
Right.
like a foreman's house.
Oh, no.
Okay. And he used one room of it for his care, is
They
that
had
right?
shelves
Yeah.
full of
Because I've interviewed some of the guys who were in some of the camps earlier, and it varied from camp to camp, just as
Yeah.
you're indicating. There were some places they described where apparently the guy would stand on his hind legs and be able
Well,
to get more out of the envelope?
Sunnyside, they had a house up on the hill set aside.
As a doctor's
As a doctor.
dispensary or something, yeah.
Yeah, and first aid
Yeah.
and whatnot. They,
Well, this is really interesting. Back on the first blacks, in what numbers did they come in, and where did you, I want to go back as to where you said they got located and what that was called.
well, I think they brought a few of them into,
1911, say a little, as the Union began to gain strength.
yes, and as the strike progressed.
Was this like a threat to show what they could bring in? if
No,
necessary,
they were
or
recruiting them
They
as
just short of labor from Europe.
strike breakers.
Yeah.
That was
The strike wasn't on, but they were potentially there. Was
Well,
that the idea?
they kept bringing them in
After the strike as well.
yeah.
Now, you remember, give me the location again in Walsenburg where you think what they created as an area, a
The
segregated area.
Red Camp
Yeah.
at Walson, and they had similar areas,
And then other mines,
like Ravenwood, Cameron.
Yeah.
They
would segregate an area within the camp.
and that was occupied by the blacks.
Otherwise, would they segregate as between Greeks, Italians, and Southern and Eastern Europeans, and say the Scotch-Irish or English
No.
miners in any way?
No, I think that there was putting them in different categories, but let's say the people acquiesced to it and didn't become a problem. Italians
Yeah.
liked to group together.
Yeah.
The Greeks,
Well, there were actual language problems.
Sure.
Some of them spoke, they just got off the boat, they spoke nothing
Yeah,
but their
well,
native language. Yeah.
you get 5 Greek miners. One spoke English. Same with
Yeah.
the Italians. Broken English.
Well, go ahead, because I want the story to go on to the fascinating people you came to know later in life yourself. Only, why don't we keep it in a sequence as to, you finished with your uncle's working career, essentially,
Yeah.
and your dad's, what year did he die?
Oh, 1957.
Oh, well, then let's see, did any of the children that followed you get born like in Tioga or some of these camps? Or were they
Oh.
delivered by the company doctors?
Oh, sure.
Which of you,
My brother K.O., my brother Dick.
where were they born, in which camp? do you remember?
K.O. was born in Taldy. Dick was born in Tioga. Paul was born in Walsenburg. Harry was born in Maitland. And the rest were born north of here.
When your dad left the southern coal
Yeah,
fields,
come
okay.
up to Frederick.
Okay, outside of your Uncle Dick, there were no other members of your family that moved in active Union circles then, until you got active yourself, is that right?
No.
Okay. Now, you went to school in Walsenburg. When you went to Tioga, would you attend the school there, or what would happen to you?
Tioga attended it was
A grade school?
grade school, 4 walls, 1 teacher.
What would happen to many of the Greeks were single and other nationalities, but what about if they had children? Were these children quickly acclimated to English and brought in, or were there very few of the new immigrant children?
Well, they weren't very few. We had a mixture of mostly Slavs, Poles, Greeks as such come in there without wives.
That's what they're described of in this book I
Yeah,
read, yeah.
yeah.
They tended to plan on going back to the old country.
Yeah, and once in a while one of them would break out and take on a young Spanish woman or arrange
But they generally stayed in the ethnic group if
That's
they
right,
could, and
yeah.
it took a while to accumulate the money to go back.
Yeah, but the Italians and that, they were different. We had,
And the Slavs tended to bring women very quickly,
yeah,
a year or so
Slavs,
after
a
immigration.
lot of my
They brought their Polish wives very quickly.
school
you
day
know.
friends were Polish, Slav, and what have you.
Okay, so that let me get the places you went to school besides Walsenburg. At Tioga and what other camps?
I went to school, Aguilar, I went to
Aguilar.
school, Maitland.
These were essentially, I think the record shows, school houses built by the company, just
Oh,
like any
sure, they
church
were
house
on-
was. They were on
on
company land.
Company property.
And sometimes the school teachers were paid by the company if the county didn't. Do you
Well, they had
remember?
control of it. If
Yeah.
they didn't, they decided where the teacher would live, and everything went with it. Now, Walsenburg, that's an independent community.
Yeah.
The public schools there
Except, didn't you say you knew Jeff Farr?
are
And,
run by, well, they were run by the county commissioners.
and Jeff Farr lived there, the king?
Yeah,
This was
sure,
his-
he
the center of the empire.
controlled.
What did he look like? You say you remember him. And his father, or what?
I knew
Or
his
you knew-
grandson.
His grandson, oh yeah.
His grandson went to school when I did.
All right, so he was Farr was an elderly person by this point, in your
Yes,
book.
by my standards.
Yeah, but right, of a
You
child.
see, I only have a vague concept of him, his pot belly and ruddy face and Stetson hat,
Yeah.
and the big 45, accompanied by a couple of bodyguards. And
You were only 6 or 7 by the time of the big strike. Do you have any impression of the brutality of the battles, or was your mother protective of you at this point, by keeping you out of, like, where would be lines of fire? And,
well, we moved off 7th Street because of the violence and the company store up the top of the street. But when the Battle of Ludlow took place, and they burnt the McNally mine, and the miners were firing from Hogback
Yeah.
over onto Walls. My aunt put us all in the basement.
this was Dick's wife?
Yes, but we'd get out and get on the fence, and bullets.
In a way, you were watching an active battle, weren't you?
Well, it
Almost
was up
like-
on the hill. It
Yeah.
just
You could see it, and,
like an observation point, you know.
yeah. Would any stray bullets get near you, or were you just simply watching a line of fire in front of you?
We didn't have sense enough to know when they whined around us that that's what it was.
The brutality of, what was it, Lingerfeld? What was that? Hated,
Lingerfeld?
yeah,
Oh,
the hated
He was a
guardsman, huh?
Yeah.
He was like a Nazi, according to some of the
Well,
guys who
I
came
think
along later.
he would have fit very well.
They describe him as terribly
Yeah,
brutal,
well,
like
they had a
unnecessarily
breed
brutal.
of them in Colorado.
Yeah.
Sherman Bell,
Mhm.
he was adjutant
Mm-hmm.
of the National Guard.
Apparently, some of the photographs, you've probably seen a great many of them, and I've looked at maybe 100 different ones of, that period.
Yeah.
And maybe you have, and would, I remember a march of women in Trinidad. Maybe your
Well,
mother would be in it if you could see a close-up with
I
it.
told you about that, Mark.
Yeah, but I'm wondering, if you wouldn't even be able to, well, maybe you would or wouldn't remember.
Well, we had a couple
the
in our
distance they were.
house for a long time. I don't know-
Photographs like
I
that,
don't know
yeah.
what enlargement
Yeah.
that'd be.
And then, of course, you've seen those of the Is it fair to say that some people say that the essential violence was from the companies and the Guard, but that the miners quite capably, being
Well,
provoked, knew how to mount a major offensive?
They had to retaliate
Yeah.
to defend themselves.
Okay, so there was we found in Appalachia, I want you to criticize or amend it, the way you see it. They quite capably, when necessary, mounted some rather major offensives and marches. They almost were military-like operations in every sense.
You had the 13th strike on the side of the miners, where they had a battle. It was a military operation.
Yeah.
You want to bear in mind, the Greeks and the
Yeah.
the Balkan War were all.
Well, this is a very important observation of yours, that these were trained troops in a way.
They were crack shots, man.
You've seen those photographs. They almost look like a Balkan. Some of the photographs look like they could be out of the Balkan Peninsula, but they're from Ludlow. These men look Greek. They have big black mustaches, and they dress Greek.
I've known some of them, you know.
Sure.
And
they were just good shots. They looked like casually wearing bandoliers and all, just like they could lead a guerrilla movement.
The whole thing, they got the name Rednecks. The red bandana was a symbol of the
Union people?
Union operation.
Yeah. So these people identified each other by wearing red bandanas during a battle, huh?
And armbands.
And armband.
I remember it. The McNally, there was some confusion between white armbands, but the accepted thing was the red bandana.
Yeah. Then Baron Bashores has told me some years ago, when I questioned him a great deal about his dad and all that thing, that his father served in effect, in a military sense, as the physician to the operations, and they had a corps of nurses. They needed everything that an army needed to operate.
Later years, I knew Bill Snyder.
Who was he?
He was an active, you might call a lieutenant in the Ludlow
battle, huh?
The whole organizing the colony.
Yeah. Was he a UMW employee, or was he a local miner?
Striker, miner.
With a great deal of talent?
Well, he got into the thick of it, and a lot of history I got from him. In fact, he had the most beautiful set of photographs of Ludlow.
What happened to Bill Snyder in later years?
He's dead now, but he was a Wobbly. He joined the Wobblies.
What else happened? Did many people, say, as a result of that, become sympathetic to or join the Wobblies in a direct, almost historical sense? Or?
No, I wouldn't put it that way. You see, any trend towards unionization leaned in the direction of UMWA. And of course, there were a big number who just hated the guts of the UMWA. Not the union, but the hierarchy.
Did they in that period or later? Now, you're speaking of the post-Lewis period.
Later.
See, by 1920, Lewis is setting up a dictatorship.
Yeah, and the 22 strike.
Oh, yeah. By then, the socialists and the decent guys hate Lewis.
Yeah, well, I recall I hadn't been, I wasn't working the mine in 22, but the miners in northern Colorado hadn't even thought about coming on strike.
Yeah.
They moved in the state rangers, they moved in National Guard, they had tanks up on the hill, bomb mine.
These were non-union people who came out in sympathy with the organized miners?
No, what I'm saying, the miners hadn't even come on strike.
They were suffering as if they had them.
Yeah. Well, following that, that strike was settled, still retaining the $1 an hour. But what turned everybody against the UMWA, 25, the coal companies just arbitrarily.
Jim, you started to say, and the machine cut you off, what happened in 1925, and I didn't realize the machine was off.
Well, when the companies just arbitrarily cut the weight scale, and we were left unorganized, so we looked to the UMW. Hearings, They were just non-entity. They didn't contribute anything. They acquiesced. We'd have to go to work for $5.50 or $5 per shift. And we were very bitter about it, but there's nothing you could do. You either work or did without.
You went to work in the coal mines in 1923?
23, yeah.
Which mine?
Columbine.
Now, the Columbine was located where, geographically? Northern Colorado?
Yeah, northern Colorado, northeast of Lafayette.
Was Columbine a Rocky Mountain fuel
Belonged to
company?
Rocky Mountain Fuel.
All right, and would you now just go into that whole thing, because you knew Josephine Roche, John Lawson, and begin your own personal experiences, what you did in the mine, and what happened to you, and who you met, and everything else.
Well, I'll bring it up to the period when the Wobblies come to the field.
You'd been working in the mine for how long when they ended?
Well, I'll put it this way. When I went to work for at the Columbine, my father worked he'd been a mine boss at the Slope at Frederick.
How far away was that?
About 8 miles.
Was that Rocky Mountain
That
Fuel?
was Rocky Mountain Fuel.
Okay. John Lawson had already gone to work for her, or not?
No, John Lawson wasn't even heard of.
Okay.
And I'll give you my own impression
Yeah.
of management of Rocky Mountain Fuel.
Before Josephine took over?
Before she took
Okay.
over. It was run on the surface predominantly by the Peart family.
How do you spell that name?
I can't remember.
Okay. Peart?
Peart.
Okay.
The old man Peart had been, he was an old-time superintendent for the Rocky Mountain Fuel. There were numbers there, like J.Q. Williams. They'd been
The bosses were experienced miners who had spent time
and
underground.
experienced strikebreakers.
Okay, good people. Yeah.
So,
CF&I model, if not directly.
the Pearts come out of Dawson, New Mexico, and if there was ever a notorious bullpen, that was it. They brought in a lot of Spanish-speaking.
To Columbine?
Yeah, in 22 strike, they opened that with Spanish-speaking.
By open, did you mean that if this was the first opening of
Yeah,
Columbine?
Columbine was a new mine then. And
So they knew Dawson, New Mexico, they knew Mexican-American workers, and they brought them in.
they knew how to handle them, and they established
Were they Spanish-speaking themselves?
No. And they had a superintendent there, old Featherstone. But I was a young kid, and if you wanted to work, you produced.
What, now, let's take the
So,
state of things. Was it hand loading when you got into it, or was this new mine all pretty mechanized?
The only thing that was mechanized, the machines.
They had undercutters.
Yeah.
Okay.
And their haulage system.
Did they have any kind of loading machines in there at that
No.
point? All hand loading?
No, the company shot down the coal, and they brought in
By their haulage system, what do you mean? They had electric motors?
electric motors.
Okay.
In fact,
Did you get on a motor early, or what happened to you? What you
I
did?
worked on top as a breaker, you call a breaker boy, or picking slate, and then dropping cars and handling slate up with the check weighman. I had a good lesson there. You know. So then I went below, and I started nipping on the motor.
Right.
And I learned to run the motor. I remember that's when I got man's pay for
First time.
the first time. The motorman didn't show up, and they couldn't move the whole south side. Could I run the motor? Sure, I could run the motor. But only on condition.
What was this, about an 8-ton motor, or what?
No, that one was six. We
6-ton,
used
okay.
13s
Okay.
that I operated later on.
And what was the height of the coal in the Columbine?
Well, Columbine was fairly high, 5, 6, 7 feet faint. It wasn't like some of the others. I'll tell you in a moment about the condition they created there. Well, anyway, before I'd get on the motor, they had to give me man's pay, $1 an hour, and I'd run the motor. So I run that motor for a long time, and went up to the 13-ton motors. But this crowd, I'm talking about the
Management. Driving management.
were so hoggish. Like I say, they raped that place. They'd go, you see, when you drive the entries in the block system, you go up through the center, and you come back and cave it. Well, they caved it.
Well, they were pulling pillars, we call it.
Yeah, but they lost a lot of virgin coal. They pulled these pillars half.
They
Didn't get good cave-ins. And
why were they pulling pillars so early in a new mine rather than developing?
they were hogs for coal, you see. Intelligent mining wouldn't have
No, they
allowed
would have
it.
let the pillars stand for a good while, and
No, on that whole south side, they lost.
it would have been much better in
Well,
mining
you know, when you lose 120, 160 acres of coal, that's a lot of coal lost in a cave-ins.
Right.
And the bottom,
How does the coal run in Columbine? How would you describe the?
it was, what did I say, vertical, but they had hills. They had some real steep hills there. Well, anyway, I left Columbine. My father did. He went down here to Littleton, operated a wagon mine for a while. And when I come back that fall, I didn't go back to.
You left to join him, or?
I went with him down there.
Now, by this, it's the fall of what year? 25, or is it?
Yeah, that's getting in 26,
All right.
25, 26.
You guys are not keeping up with UMW developments at the same time, like the
Well,
Brophy race at that time or anything?
No, UMW, they had already dumped
It's
us.
been wiped out, okay.
Yeah. There are some old diehards, you know.
Yeah,
people like-
the average guy has no faith in following.
Well,
UMW.
he's not in the union.
And the northern field had not felt a part of,
No, and they didn't keep up with even what was going on in the South. Conditions there were more oppressive.
where,
Ours were oppressive enough when you had to work for 5.5 a shift, you know.
you're speaking in the north was not as oppressive as in the south under CF&I.
Yeah, it was where CF&I
Yeah.
was predominant. Well, about this time, I had worked up in the Puritan near Frederick under fair conditions. I made good money when I worked at Puritan. But events happened. My father had to go back to Columbine, and I wound up back at the Columbine.
Any of your brothers there with you?
My brother K.O., my brother Dick.
How do you spell Kale?
K-A-Y-O, Bill.
Okay.
Yeah.
The KO was his nickname.
Yeah.
What was your nickname in those days?
I didn't have one.
Okay.
K.O., I remember he went down Puritan as a trapper, and his lunch pail hypnotized, you know.
Yeah.
So At the Columbine, conditions were really getting aggravated. They were paying 44 cents a ton for coal. They were clipping off, I would say, 500 pounds off the top of each car.
How big were the cars?
Well, I'd say they held from 3,500 to 2 ton, but 3,100 was a big weight to get for a car, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And then
So they were not only hoggish in their mining methods and wasteful, but they were one of the mines that were openly stealing
sure.
grossly.
And they had all the earmarks of the old bullpen.
Why?
I remember one mine guard worked in the blacksmith shop, carried a 6-gun on him all the time.
God, they were that afraid that something might happen? Why were they carrying mine guards so openly in the north?
Well, that was the old Puritan system of things.
This guy worked in the
he was a blacksmith,
and yet wore his 6-gun.
6-gun man out there in the shop. And then they had another full-time watchman. He was supposed to be sort of marshal, but he was nothing but a gun thug, you know.
You lived in where, the Columbine camp? Was it a camp?
No, we lived in Lafayette.
In Lafayette, okay.
Yeah. Well, that was a condition in the camp.
Period.
And it come in the month of October, and the Wobblies...
Excuse me, what did Columbine have a camp at all, or did everybody live out in town?
No, they had a camp. They had a bullpen.
And now, this was a real barbed wire camp?
Barbed wire fence.
And guards at the
gates at each end.
In 1925, that early, or
20,
all the way?
This is 20.
They opened it up in 22 that way? Or?
22, 24, you couldn't go in or out without pass or...
I see, right from the beginning they kept it that way.
It was opened as...
And how many what was the percentage of Spanish speaking?
Oh,
would you say? Would you
guess?
Half the miners or not?
60%.
Okay. Now you're getting up to what year in your impressions?
This is summer and fall of 27.
All right.
And
it's getting ripe for a union of some type.
We heard rumblings of the Wobblies around Walsenburg, Aguilar. They were organizing in the southern fields.
You heard in Columbine that they were in the southern fields?
Yeah.
Okay.
Grapevine, brought.
Isn't that amazing? Because by that year, the Wobblies are not a factor very much
Well, I'll
anymore.
tell you how they become a factor.
That's what I want to
that was the time of Sacco Vanzetti.
Ah, yeah. And you had Italians in Walsenburg.
So they pulled this strike as a protest
Where?
strike in the southern fields.
Okay. Did that strike begin in the southern fields and spread to Columbine?
Yeah.
I didn't realize it.
And the thing spread. The guys.
When did it start? In the summer? Can you remember the time of year?
When was the Sacco Vanzetti anniversary? September.
Was it as they got executed that they pulled the strike, or as they...
Right about that time, because I didn't know who Sacco Vanzetti was.
You did. A lot of the Anglo or even Spanish miners didn't know who they were, right? But in Walsenburg, probably there was a significant number of workers who appreciated it.
Embry was an organizer
at that point for the Wobblies.
Yeah.
Huh?
And when they pulled this Sacco Vanzetti strike, the miners who come out on strike didn't go back. They enlarged it into a demand for change of conditions. Well, the whole field...
How many mines did they pull out, do you think, in that area?
I couldn't.
Okay.
Trinidad, they got quite a few. Walsenburg, quite a few. They didn't get all of the people who were in the camps.
Then... Did they establish tent cities or anything like this?
In fact, they didn't have a dime. That strike
they couldn't plan it in advance because it was a demonstration that spread into a strike.
They were money for nothing. Then they come up into Northern Field.
Okay.
And a few of the old UMWA people, plus some others,
switched over.
Their underground work, they formed a committee. And I remember...
in your mind, there was an underground UMW committee, probably?
There were people at the UMWA because I went through the strike with them.
Yeah, okay. Did they ever switch over, those people, too?
Well, Embry was very close. This was not a wobbly strike.
I see. Okay.
We set up Colorado Strikers Committee or something.
I see. He was a wobbly organizer.
Yes.
What was his personal background? Was he a metal miner? What was he in his terms of his appeal?
He come out of Butte, he come out of Bisbee.
I thought he came out of like the old Western Federation of Miners.
He had that background.
Okay.
You see.
Yeah.
And there are a few more that I can't...
So he tried to make it appear like anyone who was UMW or Wobbly or WFM could all join together.
Yeah, a miners' strike.
What did you call that committee again?
A Colorado Striking Committee or something of that.
Okay.
Well, I remember we were all working the Columbine. So at our house we had a little...
Your dad was bossing, or was he?
He was fire boss.
Okay.
We had a little meeting on the back porch of the house.
All right.
Do we go to work? We don't.
Who was in the meeting?
My brothers, myself, my father.
Yeah.
So
now by then, Bill and
Dick
were in the mines with you. Okay.
So, well, anyway, we agreed. None of us would go to work till we'd seen what was going to happen. We'd give the old man the prerogative of exercising his position as a mine boss. The old man wouldn't go. So we were all on strike. Well, things began to develop, and that's where I got involved.
This was your first real active involvement in a struggle or a movement of any type.
That's right. And the more I probed into the thing, it was lacking in leadership.
Tell me who you met, though. Did you meet Embry during this period then?
Oh, I knew Embry.
He spoke a lot? What sort of speaker was he?
Well, I'll tell you how I become more active. Embry organized the caravan to go from Northern Field to Fremont County to pull the Fremont County mine.
Where was Fremont County?
Near Canyon City, Florence.
Yeah, okay, I got
in
you
there. And it was quite a spectacular thing.
How many of you went?
Oh, well, there must have been 50, 60 cars.
Okay. All from Columbine, or was it from the whole Northern Field?
Northern Field, Louisville, Lafayette.
Describe where the biggest locals were then, besides Columbine, that would have been involved in that.
I might put it this way, we didn't have a local. It
was a movement, but what were big mines besides Columbine?
Well, you had Columbine, you had State, you had Vulcan, you had Monarch at Louisville.
Okay.
A number of them.
So those kinds of people were with you, man.
Yeah, these are all...
Were those mines totally shut down in the north now?
Oh, yeah.
The Spanish workers stayed out with you? Everybody was out?
Spanish workers come on strike. Beautiful.
Good.
Some of the best leaders that strike were Spanish speaking.
Okay, there was no significant defection in the north?
No, and there was total harmony among the ethnic groups.
Okay.
You see.
Can you account for that? Do you think the punishment over the years of that management?
This thing was brewing and had to come to a head.
Okay.
Well, anyway, I went with the caravan to Fremont County, and they were going to stop us. And I remember Embry organizing captains of so many cars, or had And if they blocked us, we would leave the cars and we would go over the hill and get
Go into Fremont County.
into the area.
Canyon City, wherever you were headed for. Huh?
But we managed to get in. The people were receptive, but cold. They didn't, we were total.
They were listening to you, but not coming
Well,
out.
I remember the first.
Where did you go first? Which mine?
Uh,
Florence or?
near Florence.
Okay.
National Fuel had a big
Yeah.
producer there. And I went, and there were two roads going into this place. And the car with the speakers got lost.
Mm-hmm.
So here we were at this mine. There, I don't know, 60,
Yeah.
100 miners out there.
Yeah,
They're not hostile.
yeah.
They're not,
It's just before the shift. You're trying to keep them out. Yeah.
It wasn't even daylight yet.
Oh, yeah.
So nobody talked, so I took the soapbox,
It's your first public speaking?
first time in the mine.
Yeah.
We closed it down.
What did you say? Can you remember
I
anything you
I
said?
couldn't remember it if I wanted
Yeah.
to. I just
What brought, what
emotionally
mostly moved you? Was
recited-
it money? What had you
well,
most torn up?
what the hell? At $5.50 a shift, if you
Yeah.
worked every day. What did you have?
Yeah.
You know.
You were still single then?
Yes, and contributing to the family. Well, anyway, I became a soapboxer.
Okay.
And after that, I took on a label,
Within the family? Where did
No,
you
with
take it? In Columbine?
as
Yeah,
in the strike
yeah,
movement.
okay.
And I remember a thing that happened to me during that period. A lot of the old UMWA guys and that, said they liked me very well. And not bragging, I was a good mule skinner those days. And a
Yeah,
good mule skinner was popular.
right.
You're a good mule driver, you were popular with the miners. Said I drank too much. And I thought about that. That helped me. I quit drinking after that.
You were really dedicated to this movement that
Yeah,
you'd got
so,
hooked up with. Who was the biggest influence on you, Embry,
Um,
at this point, or who else came into it? then?
Tom came out of Chicago. I can't think of his last name.
He was a wobbly.
He was an old-time wobbly.
Old town.
And during this period...
Was he at WFM or something out of mining early or not?
No, he was...
Yeah.
You had factions in the Wobblies.
Yeah. What
He
was
was
he?
on the Seattle group. He was
Okay.
Chicago. Tom Connors.
Tom Connors came
Very,
out.
very intelligent person. Well, this goes on, and there's a big, and
Now, who got, Pat Toohey got tuberculosis?
yeah, he was in a sanatorium. He come out here to Colorado
I didn't know that.
as
What was Pat Toohey's role? Was it ever one in the National Miners Union, or was it always...
he come out of the mine workers at Washington, PA, and was there.
You mean he was a miner?
Yeah.
And he was in the UMW originally and then moved over, or
Yeah,
what?
when he come out of, now, what part he played, I
Yeah, I don't know. But when did you first meet Pat Toohey?
April 1928. Huh?
Now, by then, was the National Miner, that was the Save the Union movement?
Save
you
the
met him in.
Union movement.
Okay.
By September of that year.
Had he been in the Brophy fight in 26 probably?
Oh,
He was
very bitter and deep in
He was
that.
deep a supporter of John Brophy, huh? A
I don't-
District 5 leader?
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't remember
All right.
details of it.
Yeah, but that preceded your interest in
Oh,
matters, so
sure,
sure, because
sure.
you were
Well, I
27
went
in
back,
Columbia.
when I met him back there, I was in the Wobblies.
Really?
I met these people who were trying to persuade me, and
Yeah.
In fact, I thought they'd make that National Miners Union go. I went up into Wyoming and held meetings in defiance of the district board. Well, had a good response.
What year would that have been, National? Right after the Save the Union movement, they organized this?
Yeah.
Right out of it?
Yes.
In 28, huh?
Going in 29 that summer. And, well, to finish this thing about Pat's imprint was there. The influence of the...
Was he the biggest imprint on the
No, there were others
National Miners Union?
behind the scene, but getting to back to what you're talking about.
Yeah, my question, let me repeat, is
it
wasn't
was very
the-
narrow, it was
yeah,
very
okay.
sectarian.
they struck me there was something wrong because it couldn't reverse itself, and Lewis really had a mass sweep of the coal fields without the NMU playing a role in that.
Well,
period.
there wasn't...
They were too deeply
They published
hating.
a paper, Tony Minerich published the paper
Now, was Tony Minerich actually located in Fairmont?
in Pittsburgh.
In Pittsburgh.
He managed
was-
the office there in Pittsburgh.
Okay.
And Bozich, you ever hear that name?
Bozich.
Yeah.
How do you spell it? I don't even know. With a B-O-Z?
B-O-S-I-C-H, I guess.
All right.
They were Frank Borich, that was his name.
That was his name? Frank Borich, I've heard of, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that name I've heard.
They had him up for deportation.
Did they deport him, you think?
I don't think so, because
He was in the National Miners Union.
he was
Frank
a
Borich. Well, he was an
national
executive?
organizer.
Okay.
He was the head top
Was
dog.
Tom Myers-Koff, the president, a figurehead or a real figure in the union?
Tom Myers-Koff had been a president in the UMWA,
Yeah.
and he was elected an officer, National Miners Union.
President, actually, at one point. But
Yeah. But no, he'd either been in jail or was sick for a long period there. And
when Lewis suddenly acted in
I'll-
June and July, you were in Pittsburgh, you say, at that
yeah,
point. Do you remember what happened, how he sent his organizers out, and what the reaction
I'll
was?
tell you,
I'd like you to tell me how you viewed the camps and how they responded to them.
the whole policy of the NMU and the party at that time, when this thing developed, was not to make any opposition. They aided this campaign, and it was kind of hard talking to some of the old diehards.
Because they hated Lewis.
Well, they hated it. They hated the Union.
Yeah.
And I remember I was teaching a class out at Greensburg, Pennsylvania,
Yeah.
at that time, on the history of the American labor movement.
Yes. Right in the coal camps.
And this thing come up,
Sure.
and it was a hard thing.
That would have been June or July of, right then, in the middle of the summer of
I can't-
33, right after NRA went in.
Well, it was that my first year there in Pittsburgh.
And look who's here.
We'll keep you out of this, Bill.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, I can remember how
Well, that worked.
violently
Yeah. The old miners despised that, didn't they?
and what the whole thing was. You've got to have a union. If you're organized and you're together.
Today that seems simple, but at that time they despised the union, didn't they?
Well, they hated
Lewis.
Well, what I can't remember some of those guys.
Well, John Lewis, Bill Murray,
yeah, but
Little
this-
Tom Kennedy, and Van Bittner was despised in West
very
Virginia.
much.
And
But
Tony
there was-
Teti's
There was
lieutenant
an
was
Irishman, they had a District 5.
Pat Fagan.
Fagan.
Yeah, they hate Fagan.
Oh,
They used to sing songs like "Hang Fagan from a sour apple tree." Every
well,
night, they tell
hell,
me.
you're telling us to
Isn't it?
go
Yeah.
down and tell him we want to join his union,
Yeah,
you
right.
know?
After how many, 4, 5, 6 years of fighting him, huh?
Well, it was all of this.
Yeah.
And the thing was neither here nor there, because some old timers hung to UMWA.
You mean you never had really broke their love affair?
No.
They were just listening to you because you were effective.
If they didn't exactly pay dues, they had an affinity for it, you know.
Yes.
You see.
But you think a guy like Pat Toohey was more left, he wouldn't have appreciated what you just said. He wouldn't have admitted that many of the good, loyal NMUs
Well,
underneath.
at that time, it was,
Wasn't good to say that.
well, I'll put it this way. If you weren't for us, you're against us, you know.
Yeah.
If you don't support the NMU, you're a bastard.
Yeah.
A lot of bad blood.
Well, actually, Guy, it was just like gunfights over just
Yeah.
the same as the old days.
Well, they
Men were
were.
beat up over this.
There were plenty of people. Alec Campbell was killed there.
Alec Campbell, who was he?
He was
NMU organizer?
Save the Union
Save the Union
organizer.
organizer.
brought him
Where
in.
was he killed?
Near Washington,
PA.
in there.
Mhm.
Yeah. No,
You-
at that time,
Yeah.
I think no, the party in the NMU wasn't too slow.
It was just a more difficult, you could
Well,
not
they had
persuade
nothing,
you
so
people.
why be in opposition? You see, this
Well,
thing was positive.
yeah, but let me see if I've got it. In the summer of '33, it's fair to say they couldn't play a positive role because they couldn't turn their people around and didn't want to. So the most you said earlier is, why don't you guys be neutral? I mean, you can't keep the people from going into it.
Well, it wasn't that. We told them to join.
Okay. But there was a lack of enthusiasm amongst the cadre, really.
There was among the upper echelon.
Yeah.
Not the
At the
miners.
local level, the working
Well-
miners knew they needed a union, didn't they?
And they went to the union.
Yeah.
You see.
So the NMU people at the local union level really were pretty practical. Here was their chance to get in the union, they got in it.
Yeah, and a lot of them stayed. They were very friendly. You can go out and talk to them, meet with them.
In other words, they now were UMW people or
Yeah,
on
but-
committees, but they were friendly to the viewpoint that you went to them with.
That's,
So by '34, when you told me you went to West Virginia,
yeah.
this was the situation. Former NMU contacts were now
Well,
people.
West Virginia was a little different thing.
Why? Tell me.
There was bad blood down there.
You remember, when I told you the name of Tony Tita, you knew it
Yeah.
immediately, didn't you?
Yeah.
Huh?
Well,
He was the chief organizer under Van Bittner.
he was the Van Bittner man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He was his right-hand man and a big Italian-American community, as you remember, so that he was a
Well,
key figure.
This guy who took Lewis's place and thought he could be an executioner as well as,
Yeah.
you know, that was prevalent.
These were the kind of loyalists. They were thugs
Well,
for
it
John
was
L., weren't they?
It
In the
was a
way?
little mafia.
Yeah.
Little mafia.
Well, did you know that Jock Yablonsky was reported to be that too in maybe you remember? He came out of Washington, PA, and was reported to be a thug for Lewis that used to break the kneecaps in the
Well,
is what they tell me, the older guys.
tried to reflect, bring back, when I talk about
Yeah.
Dick Kamenovich and Frank Borich. He
Now, where was Vic Kamenovich located? In Fairmont?
right.
He was up and down the river
up and
between
down the river. I think
between
he
Morgantown and Clarksburg.
lived-
Huh?
Yeah. And
You remember Scott's Run at Morgantown? Did you go in there a lot?
I think he lived in Scotts Run.
Vic Kamenovich.
Yeah.
I'll tell you, I'll go see Mike Tomasky, who is a lawyer whose daddy was a miner, and he himself was a miner before he became a lawyer.
Yeah.
Mike led a left-wing revolt, they tell me, starting in the 40s, late 40s.
Yeah.
And I've never gone, I was going to go have a talk with him because he would know,
Yeah.
for his father, most of those people.
Well,
Vic Kamenovich was the main leader, you'd place it in that? Monongahela River area?
Yeah, he went up and down.
Did he work for NMU, or what did he work
He was an NMU organizer, but later an unemployed organizer.
of the unemployed councils?
Yeah, they were.
Yeah, they had big power.
Yeah.
But you're saying it was, in a way, the Western Pennsylvania mines were more political and practical, whereas it was pure bad blood, almost feuding in West Virginia you were dealing with and getting them in.
On a minor scale, you know, because once things took place in Western Pennsylvania, went right down too.
Well, that's my impression, is that the minute the sound trucks really pulled up to the barbed wire and the guards were neutralized and the people were called out to sign up in the union, the show was over.
They had a hell of an impact there. Eleanor Roosevelt come into the coal fields.
Right.
She went out there to Homestead to speak on the post office steps.
You remember that?
Hell, I was there that day.
What do you think that was 33 or 34 now? Where are you?
I can't. This is right after the beginning of the NRA.
You think this coincided with Lewis's drive, or did it follow it? Because I don't remember.
That's what gave the impetus to the whole drive for unionization.
You think her coming to Homestead?
That
was a steel center.
Steel, but
the message was
it
that
went right down that valley.
Okay, that's very important. I didn't have that piece of information.
She had
When do you think she went there? In the summer or when?
I can't remember.
You were there though at Homestead when she came.
Yeah, because
was there a mass? Where was it? On the steps of the courthouse?
She went to the post office.
Yeah.
To speak on the
And
steps.
Was there tens of thousands? How many?
Oh
big?
no,
What was
no. Hell, 3 people were hesitant to get together in the Homestead because they'd be attacked for a meeting.
Because this was not like this was steel.
Yeah, and I remember the mayor said, if it's Jesus Christ, he won't, he couldn't speak here. And I admire her.
What did she say? You were there. What did she do?
I can't remember.
Would it be reported in the Pittsburgh papers?
I'm sure it would be.
As a speech she made, but was she pro-union? Did she say they had a right to
she went out to the mines, took a ride down the mine. Didn't you ever see that?
Yeah, but I thought that I thought that occurred in connection with the beginning of Arthurdale and the resettlement administration, where they were going to take the unemployed miners and resettle them onto farms. Do you remember that movie?
She rode in a pit car into the mine.
Where do you think that mine was?
I can't
in Pennsylvania
remember.
Or in West Virginia?
Western Pennsylvania.
All right.
Yeah.
In connection with the Homestead visit, or before or after?
I can't. All those events happened there.
All right.
The pit.
Yeah, no, that's a good point you're giving me, though, because I've been trying to account for the fact that a lot of the historians say Roosevelt took advantage of Lewis took advantage of saying the president wants you to join a union in his signs and his slogans.
I don't doubt that.
That was the line of his organizers on the loudspeakers and everything. And it was a brilliant line in a way, because
people at NMU knew the whole thing wasn't get into a hassle with that, but to take advantage, organize the unorganized.
Yeah.
And that was a good way to do it.
Did you have trouble, like you said you were making a talk, say in June or July, and this question arose while you were teaching the history of the labor movement, right?
Yeah.
So it required viewing historically what was otherwise a terribly bitter.
No, you couldn't resolve the problem by reviving the past.
Okay.
You only
And the NMU, in your opinion, did not have the mass base. It had. You were beginning to tell me about that factionalism or something.
Well, it had a very narrow sectarian base. Now, in 31, it had
a mass base.
Base.
But by 33, that
it dwindled.
Yeah.
Sure. And that losing that mass base was again, in my opinion, due to this sectarian, a strike You got to hit it.
Yeah.
When you make a certain point,
If you drag a strike out, you'll
you
lose.
don't have the power to go forward, you got to retreat.
Right.
I learned that in the wobbly strikes.
That's
Wobbly movement.
Well, you learn it in one or another movement, but it's a rule of
Yeah.
strikes. If you drag them on too long,
Well, that started the disintegration.
You were telling me, but I don't think you finished, what the factions were. You said, like, Pat Toohey, at this point, by 31 even, there were factions inside of the NMU. Is that fair?
Well, prior to the formation of the NMU.
Because it was already a coalition of forces. huh?
Sure.
People speak of it as the Communist Parties Union, but it was much more complex. Is that a fair statement? Or?
Well, there were factions in the Communist Party. Bear that in mind.
Well, go ahead, because
You see,
you mean
it took me a long time when I joined the Communist Party
to realize, huh?
to reconcile myself to it.
I see.
Because
Well, what were the then factions?
I can't.
The Lovestonites were a faction?
Lovestonites.
And was Pat Toohey close to them?
He was very much a Lovestonite.
If you had in a sentence say, what did the Lovestonites believe? Were they sectarian? Were they believed in pushing the revolution? What were the Lovestonites pushing?
Hell, I never thought that you were out for anything but to control the party and
Yeah.
any of the
Yeah.
organizations that the party was working in.
But because of all these factions, the NMU and the objective situation, the NMU by 33 was very narrow base.
By 33?
Yeah, by the
Yes.
time Lewis moved.
Yeah.
In a way, his move was historic then. If he had tried it in 31, even if there was an NRA, it might have
You wouldn't have made it.
because the left had more control amongst the
sure,
miners than he
sure.
had. But at this point, the left's influence with the miners had deteriorated seriously.
Well,
Or isn't that
I'll
fair?
put it, they were powerless.
Yeah,
They didn't have force to move.
yeah.
And it wasn't just the opposition. The miners out there with their families, unemployed and whatnot.
Working 2 days a week if they were.
Well, hell, some didn't work that much.
No.
And the whole line, get something going, the NRA, get
Yeah.
the country back to work.
Yeah,
And the government just said, well, if you want to get to
Yeah.
work, let's have peace, join the UNWA, and we'll get a contract and go to work.
of course, I
They
can
were-
see the practicality because the left also questioned Roosevelt had campaigned on such a conservative line
Yeah.
that they couldn't believe that
Well,
any
I
of his
wasn't-
legislation was
I
going.
wasn't here at the time of his campaign, but when the NRA went into effect, that's when I went in Pittsburgh.
I wonder if you'd flash back for me to the Columbine strike, because you've met Embry and you were on a motorcade down into the southern part. And then you
Yeah.
said you came to Denver and had a mass meeting or something in Denver.
Well, we come back up to
Yeah.
the northern field, and the Denver Labor Trades Assembly and Grace.
Weren't they scared of the IWW leadership?
Oh, no, Grace. A lot of them were, but there were a lot of people like Bill Tanner, the Typographical Union.
Broad-minded and progressive leaders.
Sympathetic. They raised relief.
Yeah.
So, and
How long did you all stay out at places like Columbine?
started in October, and the strike was broken.
October 27.
Yeah, by February.
When did the men get killed and how? Were you there at the time?
No, I'll get
Yeah.
to
All right,
the
excuse
story.
me.
I'm telling you about the background of this meeting. Heist was a Methodist minister,
What was his name?
Reverend Heist,
Yeah, where was he located?
here in Denver.
Denver, okay.
Grace Church was
All right.
very popular for unpopular causes.
Yeah.
And the Wobblies was
Yeah.
on this evening, and I didn't know Josephine Roach from Mrs. McGillicuddy. Well, these two speakers were making a terrible mess of things.
Yeah.
Talk about the poor girl in the street and
Yeah.
all of that stuff had not a damn thing to do with the life of a coal miner. So I called him, so next thing I got the podium.
You were in the audience and you got this chair, okay.
Yeah.
You got the floor.
So I related my story.
You'd been out on strike so long?
Well,
the
what
issues were.
it was to
Yeah.
be a coal miner,
Okay.
background in Colorado and whatnot. And Josephine Roach,
Was in that audience?
she was perturbed.
She was there listening to you.
Yeah, and I was working in Columbine, you know.
And that was her family's man.
Yeah. So I went home about 5 o'clock in the morning. The planes were overhead.
Really?
Yeah,
What are you doing?
National Guard,
Oh.
spotter planes. And my mother woke me because my brothers were on the picket line, see. So we knew something was up, no good. And my father went with me. We got in the car, went to Columbine, and by that time, the picket line had been shot up.
By whom?
Uh,
National Guard was out
State
there? What?
police.
State police. Brought in right then?
right then, mine guards.
Mm-hmm.
They had some real thugs there, you know. And Lou Sheriff, who had been a pal of Governor Adams, he was the head ranger there. Well, they'd gotten, when I got in there, we come through the gate and there were guards on the gate, and taken the wounded and the dead, had cleaned it up. But I got down to where the mine was, and they'd taken Adam Bell, who was the strike leader. He had been beaten severe. Well, there's nothing we could do, and we decided to get out. Well,
Did you know there were several dead at that point?
yeah, we
You could
didn't know
guess
how
it,
many.
yeah.
We didn't know who had been killed.
Yeah. You mean you're afraid of arrests now?
Yeah, well, we're getting out of there.
Yeah.
We couldn't get out. We're arrested.
Yeah. Your
And,
father and brothers and all?
my brothers were out.
Mhm.
They let my father go back home. And
They arrested you, though.
Adam Bell and I went to Well County Jail. Yeah,
What county was that?
Well County.
Well County Jail.
Yeah. I stayed there 3
What were you
weeks.
charged with?
No charges.
Held. Did that break the strike with the men going back
Well,
then?
no. It put more backbone into the strike. But there weren't the resources, you know,
Yeah.
to carry it
You
on.
were losing southern West
Well,
Colorado then, maybe.
We're losing the South, and on the whole, the miners stuck pretty good in that strike.
Yeah.
But
How long? That you were arrested when? When was it?
this was November
We don't have another bill.
22nd. 21st, the massacre took place.
Oh, of what? Of
November.
November, and the strike started in September.
Yeah.
And it was busted by the next spring? Or when?
By February,
By February.
March. In fact,
Did they arrest any IWW organizers at that time?
most of them were in jail.
Already? Embry and them?
Amby had been in jail right after that.
What did Josephine Roche do about her being disturbed. Anything at that point?
Well,